dragnet is still on, which scares you a little bit. But as a storyteller, I know that the best way to talk to you about telling a story is probably to answer questions that you may have. The first thing you need, and we can get serious here for a minute, how many of you are interested in writing as a thing to do? Well, that's enough. No story is a story at all unless it has people. And this, incidentally, is where most of them, what's going on here? What's that beeping that happens? No, seriously, what's the beeping? That's mine? I have nothing that beeps on me, kid. No, he's not beeping. My sound man isn't beeping, so don't worry about it. And so don't come tell me what I'm doing up here. However, I will say that no story, let's get back on the subject, no story is a story in our terms, in terms of the reader, and often in the terms of the writer too, unless you got people. Now that sounds like a cliche, but it really isn't, because this is where science fiction fails generally. That it deals with an idea, and the people are very secondary. And so ultimately science fiction has about as much emotional appeal as a diluted bottle of wild strawberry Diet Yule. You can never remember the people in a science fiction story, but you can always remember the situation. You can remember the incident. But as far as the people are concerned, you don't quite understand it. Now, as a writer and as a storyteller, I create people primarily. And then the people will be involved in an action. Now, a lot of people who listen to me probably think that what I'm dealing with, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, probably think that what I do is tell actual incidents in the form of a report as to what happened, let's say, for example, when I was a kid. How many of you think that I deal in specific memories? I'm glad to see there's only a few. And those people who are generally having problems with their own memories. So. I have a feeling that almost everybody can't remember last Wednesday clearly. And so he suspects that if you can, you must be 150 years old. In fact, almost everybody who listens to me firmly believes that he heard me when he was a kid, no matter how old he is. Why? Because there's a great transference between the subject matter of a writer and the reader's own life. In other words, a person reading Catcher in the Rye. How many of you ever read Catcher in the Rye? Well, all right. Reading Catcher in the Rye, they tend to believe they really know Holden Caulfield. And in fact, they often will tend to begin to believe they are Holden Caulfield. And ultimately, they'll go around looking for phonies. And they also feel that if they met J.D. Salinger, they would have a great deal to talk about. Because after all, they're the same people. And a lot of people who listen to me tend to believe that if they met me, we would have a great deal in common. There's a lot to talk about. Because they relate to the people in my stories, they relate they may relate to Flick, they may relate to Bruner, or they may relate to Schwartz. And in fact, a lot of people will write to me and even take the names of the characters. Believe it or not, I get letters from kids all the time who will sign themselves Flick. How do you like them apples? Or will sign themselves Schwartz, or whatever it is, the character that they decide that they want to be. And they decide that's what they are. So that's part of telling a story. There's nothing wrong with that. It's part of telling a story. In fact, if you're really telling a story, well, you're really telling some truths about life. Anybody who listens to you, or or reads you will ultimately believe that you've got a secret, the writer has a secret method of determining the innermost thoughts that you had. It may surprise you to know that a lot of readers, and a lot of, in fact, I've even been sued by one reader, who believed that I had taken his life and put it in my books. That's right, he was very serious, convinced the lawyer he ought to sue me for it. I never heard of this son of a bitch. It's a fact. And you know, it was a fascinating example of that transference, and he refused to accept the fact that I didn't know about him. Never heard of the guy before. And this happens to a lesser or a greater degree in everybody who relates to a story that's told in genuinely human terms. Now, when you tell a story, you have to remember, you must make your characters behave the way a real human being would actually behave under those circumstances, not a literary human being. Now, a literary human being generally acts in a very different way than you and I act. And this is why so many characters are called great literary characters, but they don't have much relationship to human characters. For example, I'll give you a classic example, Catch-22. Very few characters in Catch-22 behave the way any human being ever conceivably could behave. They're literary characters. Have nothing to do with human beings. They're a literary concept. So the idea, that's why many novels that have value of that kind, and I'm not putting down Catch-22, except that it is not, it's not, it has nothing to do with life. That any novel like that, when it's placed on the screen, tends to fail. It's not as good on the screen, because here you've got a real human being acting like a cartoon human being. If you're going to follow the novel, you follow what I'm saying there. And so if any of you saw the movie of Catch-22, you know that the movie didn't come off at all. It just simply didn't, because there is no such character in real life as, say, major. No way. Also, there's no such character as even Yossarian. The only way you would find a person as sweet and as beautiful as Yossarian, you'd have to go back to the Bobbsey twins. No way. And so, on the other hand, my work is quite the opposite. My work is so human to many people that it doesn't seem to be literature. It seems to be stories about real people. And that, we know, isn't literature, somehow. And so when you deal with characters that could conceivably exist in life, the interesting thing, though, the Europeans, in their relationship to my writing, for example, in Playboy, recognize that I'm using a phenomenon or a form which is not used often in America. It's a term that Bertolt Brecht used to describe a lot of his own work, and that is a term called epic realism. Now, epic realism is an important phrase if you're going to particularly work in humor. That epic realism means to take a character and a real character, remember, a genuine character, a recognizable human being, like, say, Flick or Bruner, and then make him, expand him, much larger than life, but always retaining the reality of himself. It's like taking a photograph, a real photograph, and expanding it till it's, 1,000 feet high. It still remains realistic, because it is a photograph of a real human being. But it is 1,000 feet tall. It's to amplify this. So if you see reading, say, for example, in the current collection of, say, Wanda Hickey, the character of the Bumpus family. Now, the Bumpus family, we all recognize. We've had some form of the Bumpus family live next door to us. everybody in his life. And now, by the way, nobody in the crowd recognizes his family as the Bumpus. Even if you come from a crowd who eats off the floor and throws the garbage on the air shaft, your old man throws his false teeth out the window every night when he gets in a fight, you don't recognize yourself as the Bumpus family. It's only the guy next door that recognizes you, see. So you take, there's an example of taking a character, of taking a family, a whole characteristic phenomenon, and multiplying it by 1,000. Hey, come on, kids, come on, you're really disturbing everybody, really. Now, if you're going to take pictures, take them later, will you? Afterwards,